We're here at La Bourget at COP21 right outside Paris, and we're here with Professor Niklas Hohne, who is the lead author for the UNEP Gap Report from 2010 through 2015, and so the expert on the gap, which is where we are predictably headed in terms of our emissions and what needs to happen so that we can deplete emissions sufficiently to not surpass the 2 degrees Celsius safety window. And we had a conversation with you earlier, and really from that conversation sparked some things from my thinking that I wanted to run by you as a follow-up. And so I very much appreciate you taking this time again for us so that the citizens who aren't part of these negotiations, who aren't scientists, who haven't been in the thick of this through the course of all of this climate change work can have a general understanding of where we are and what it is actually going to take to bridge the gap and to bridge the gap in time.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, good. So as a follow-up, as I said, clearly what you said the the game is, or what we're after, is to get to zero. So to get to zero emissions. And not only to get to zero emissions, but to get to zero emissions before we deplete what I'm going to call the emissions budget. Is that what we should, the emissions budget? Because as I understand, the emissions budget is all gases, carbon, methane, everything. So is that accurate?
Yes, the concept of the budget comes about because CO2, that's the main greenhouse gas, stays in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. And that basically means we have, for a certain temperature limit, we have only a finite amount of CO2 emissions that we can emit. And that basically means we have a budget, and that budget is depleted at a certain moment. And that then means if it's depleted, emissions have to be zero. That concept is from CO2, the main greenhouse gas. It does not 100% apply to the other greenhouse gases. They are methane, and that comes from oil and gas production or from animals, or N2O, that also comes from animals and some industrial processes, and some other greenhouse gases. But one does apply that whole concept of a budget also to all greenhouse gases, although that's not 100% scientifically accurate.
Okay. So again, just to have it simple, so the game is to get to zero before we use up the carbon budget, right?
Exactly.
Okay, good. So, and from your study, what I got from your study is that going on the path that we're on, which includes the commitments that are being made here in Paris and the agreement that's being made here in Paris, if those commitments actually get kept, adhered to, that we will use up that, what I'm going to call kind of the total emissions window. We will use that window up sometime within the next 20 to 30 years. Is that accurate?
That's correct. We have this finite budget, and we need to reduce emissions fast. And what countries have proposed here is already better than what we had thought they would emit before. So they reduced their future projected emissions, but not far enough. Global emissions are still projected to increase, and that basically means that this budget will be depleted quite soon. What we need to do is reduce emissions to zero, and the earlier we do that, the more time we have, because it's a total budget that we have to spend. If we overspend now, which we are doing, then we will have to make up for that afterwards and reduce drastically and very, very fast, and that is usually very expensive.
Okay. All right, so then I want to use I'm kind of going to coin a term here, and you can say, well, that's completely inaccurate, but because I see that 20 to 30 year, that's kind of the total window that we have. Because once that window's gone, that's it. You're not gonna, that budget goes, it just goes, right?
Yeah, there is one opportunity maybe to overspend, and that is at a later period of time, take CO2, the major greenhouse gas, out of the atmosphere again. And if you think you can do that in the latter half of the century, you can overspend today. But that involves quite a lot of technological and other problems. We don't have that technology yet. The only technology that we think today could be doing this is carbon capture and storage in combination with biomass. So you grow trees, and while the trees are growing, they take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then you burn the biomass, and by before or after burning you take the CO2 out, you scrap it, and then you bury it under the ground. And it has two main problems. One is we need to have the land mass to grow all of this biomass. There's competition with food, for example. We need to do that sustainably. And second, we need to have that technology to do it, and that's right now it's very expensive, and all the pilot plans have basically been stopped. So these are the two main problems. So if you really bank on this, that's a very risky strategy.
Okay. All right, and then there's the total window, and then there's what I see, I look at it as kind of the window of opportunity that we have left. Because, clearly the more scenarios we miss in terms of how the scenarios are laid out, the more scenarios we miss, then the more difficult it becomes for the later scenarios to actually work. So one of the things that was mentioned in your report is that one of the targets would be that we would be at 44 gigatons emissions in 2020. And that what's predicted is that we will be at approximately 52 gigatons. So what that means is that there's an 8 gigaton gap to make up between now and 2020 that would, if we did that, that would then let us see that we're on a path that we could actually see of not exceeding the budget. Is that accurate?
Exactly. We are currently overspending. You said we are 8 gigatons above the path that would be optimal. So we are currently overspending. That doesn't mean we can't make it anymore. We still can, but we need to make up for that. Yes. And if we are 8 gigatons too high right now, at a certain moment we need to be 8 gigatons lower than we had thought we would be. Yeah. And that, the longer we wait, the more difficult it will be. Because we are currently installing infrastructure like a coal-fired power plant that has a very long lifetime and is expected to emit over its long lifetime. And since we need to go to zero, that also means that at some point in time this infrastructure has to stop emitting, and you basically then have to stop a coal-fired power plant before the end of its life, and that's something very expensive.
So for all of us, this is what I think, all right? I think it would be a great campaign. I don't know how to do it, but from everything I've gotten from you, from the reports, all of this is however it would shake out. It would be a great campaign that for the next 5 years, what the game would be to close that 8 gigaton gap. And that everything that we hear and all of the progress and the pledges that are being made here and all of that, we could then look at inside of that framework to see, is that in fact impacting that 8 gigaton gap or not, so that in 5 years I would like to be able to say that we did close that gap and that we've got a future now where 2 degrees is predictable, or not hitting 2 degrees is predictable, where right now we can't see that. Does that seem like a worthwhile campaign or game, or kind of in the next 5 years? Because I see, the window of opportunity, and when I've asked people, I talked to the Assistant Secretary General at the UN. I've talked to, lots of people that are inside. When you say, look, in terms of the real opportunity window, when it's just kind of like the emissions accelerate, it hasn't been reduced to the point where we can predictably see not using up that budget. That critical time is around 5 years. Would you agree?
Yes, we are basically already far too late. Yeah? We should have started in 1992 when the first international treaty on climate change came about. Then the path would have been a lot easier. But since then, emissions have increased significantly, and that means we are quite late. So if we really want to make it, then the next 5 years are the 5 years that make the decision. Right. Yeah? So that's really, really important. And from my point of view, we have the opportunities to do that. I mean, the technologies are there, and this is exactly what we have to do. Okay. The international negotiations have acknowledged that, actually. They have 4 years ago, when they decided to decide on a climate agreement here in Paris, they also agreed to work on raising the ambition before 2020. So there are 2 parallel negotiation streams. One is on the new agreement, and one is on raising ambition before 2020, because everybody realized we are very late in the game. We need to do it now and quickly, and can't wait until a new climate agreement comes about in the year 2020 or thereafter, that's too late.
Okay, and lastly, to really put you on the spot, okay, would you be willing to work in terms of just being in communication with us, in terms of the civil society element of the campaign and how it's going and the updates? And I know you've got everything that you're already doing, which is amazing, but it would just be wonderful to have your participation in terms of this 5-year campaign. Is that something you would be up for?
Now, I'd be very happy to support you there. We are a research institute. We do a lot on research on what is possible to do. We looked at what would happen if all countries would apply the best-in-class policies that some other countries already apply. And if you do that, you find there's huge opportunities. Yeah? So everything that is necessary is already done somewhere.
Yes,
yeah?
yes.
So some countries have very good standards for cars, for example. If they would be applied everywhere, we would be a huge step forward.
Yes.
Some countries support renewables very good. Some countries support energy efficiency in buildings very good. If all countries would do what they do, then we would be very, very close to what is necessary, and that is something that I'm happy to work.
That's great, because I think one thing that would make the real difference is that kind of commitment, that kind of demand, that kind of we are going to win this game. We're going to close that 8 gigaton gap between 2020, and that's what we're going to do. So I just so happy to have you in the game.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to support that, definitely. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, excellent.